It's June 2022 and Sega have just released Sonic Origins, a long-awaited collection of the classic Mega Drive games from the 90s.
Yeah!
But a lot of people don't like what they've done to the music. Now, it's a few years later, the dust has settled, and the Sonic music fandom is completely fine and not had any kind of meltdown over any other game's soundtrack. And I thought it would be fun to revisit the Origins music situation and do a point-by-point musical analysis of some criticisms about the replacement tracks for Carnival Night Zone and, well, no, it's just Carnival Night Zone basically. People had some thoughts on that one. Disclaimer, this is not a video about a certain pop star's involvement in Sonic 3's soundtrack. Oh wait! That subject has been well documented, there's some great videos on it, so please go check them out. No, we're going to focus on longtime Sonic composer Jun Sinoe's rearrangements of the tracks from the 1103 prototype of Sonic 3, which were created specifically for Origins to replace the Jackson team's tracks. Without further ado, strap in for the Nerdfest. Issue 1. General Sound Quality. One of the most reoccurring points made by critics is that the Origins tracks sound muffled or dull. There are several reasons why people could be perceiving them as such, and we'll get into those later. First though, let's address the fact that the entirety of Sonic 3's audio, not just the music, is of a different sound quality to the other games in the collection. And you might not notice this if you just jump straight into Sonic 3 from the Origins menu. So let's put the games back to back and listen to when we trigger the ring pickup SFX. And note, you might want headphones on for this. Things get even clearer when we look at the range of frequencies in an EQ plugin. We can see from the EQ reading that the ring sound in Sonic 3 has quieter high frequencies. It's almost like there is a low-pass filter applied to the game's sound. I was pretty surprised by this when I found it, even more so realizing this same issue is in the original release from 1993. And I couldn't tell you why that's happening.
You're not an intellectual, you're a fake and a fraud.
So with that out of the way, we know that when talking about these prototype tracks in Origins, we have to keep in mind our experience of the music is potentially colored by the overall duller sound quality of Sonic 3. Issue 2. Instrumentation variety. Another reoccurring comment is that the Origins versions, Carnival Night Zone specifically, sound less interesting. One explanation for this could be the fact that these tracks have fewer instrument changes and instrument variety going on compared to the 1103 versions. As a result, there's less timbral variation in the sound of the music, and our ears get bored quicker. Let's look at Carnival Night Zone Act 1 for examples. In the 1103 version, the melody switches instrument for the B section. This kind of change helps differentiate sections within the track, and it helps the listener feel like the music is moving forward, like we're on a journey. In Origins, however, we don't go on that journey. The melody is played by the same instrument through both the A and B section. It just makes it a bit meh in comparison. It's not just in the melody where the Origins Carnival Night versions lack variety either. There's just generally fewer instruments used across the tracks, and the ones used in Origins have very similar sounding textures. Here's a quick sample of each instrument used in Carnival Night Zone Act 1, first in Origins, now 1103. You can hear the 1103 versions use 2 extra instruments, and there is more timbral variety between all the different instruments. It just makes things more interesting to listen to. Additionally, the 1103 versions use instruments that we hear multiple times across the rest of the game's music, and as a result, they feel like natural additions to the soundtrack. Additionally, and this is possibly just my own opinion, but the lead instruments have quite a dull, uninteresting quality to them next to the bright and spiky palette of lead sounds we hear on tracks like Hydro City Zone Act 1 and 2. Issue 3. Low versus high pitch. Something else that contributes to the sounds less interesting argument is the difference in high and low pitch between the Origins and 1103 versions. Typically, we as the listener perceive higher pitches to be more impactful in music. Think of any power ballad in pop music and how a singer reaches for their top notes towards the end of the song. The 1103 version of Carnival Night Act 1 uses this idea by having the melody played in 2 octaves, meaning the melody is doubled at a higher pitch. Whereas in Origins, aside from the fact it's actually in a lower key to start with and therefore already lower in pitch,
Strike one.
the melody is technically played in 2 octaves, but the higher octave is quieter and it ends up being smothered by the added lower harmony anyway. While the way the harmonies, melodies, and other parts have been well separated and placed in the harmonic landscape to produce clarity and excitement in the 1103 version, Origins, by comparison, ends up sounding muddy and bland due to the lower key and harmonies. Issue 4. Less spatialisation. When we listen to how both Origins and 1103 use the stereo field, i.e. how the instruments are placed left, right, or in the center, the difference is again striking. You can use the stereo field to make music sound big and wide, or small and focused. When a track has more width to it, we again typically perceive this as more exciting and interesting. Just listen to how the instruments sound spread apart in the 1103 version. By this point, you're probably not surprised to hear that in Origins, the prototype tracks don't do this. They are in fact almost entirely mono, i.e. all the instruments are placed slap bang in the middle. There is little to no panning used, no use of the stereo field, and therefore they do not have a sense of width like in 1103. Looking back on the points we've made here for a second, we can summarize that the main problem is that compared to the 1103 versions, the Origins tracks are not making use of various arrangement and compositional techniques that are typically used to make music sound more interesting. They don't get the heart pumping in the way we expect sonic soundtracks to do so. Issue 5. Poor instrument choices. Okay, we're going to switch to Carnival Night Zone Act 2 for the last point. And, well, it's an odd one. It also possibly explains some of the issues we've talked about so far. Around 30 seconds in, we get this weird bell sound. Okay, what is going on here? This instrument seems out of tune, also out of key. It just sticks out in a bad way. What if I told you the same thing is in the 1103 version, but instead it sounds like this? I think it's not a stretch to suggest that this sounds much more pleasant and complementary to the song. So if it's that obvious that this bell sound is bad to me, and possibly to you, and it wasn't in the 1103 versions, why did it get used here? Okay, here is where we get extra nerdy. There is a theory online that suggests the reason this is happening is because the voice banks being used across the final release, the 1103 prototype, and Origins are all different from each other. Voice banks are essentially the group of instrument voices available to use in the soundtrack. The replacement prototype tracks in Origins specifically are using an outdated voice bank from a version of the game before the 1103 prototype. Put simply, Sonic Origins is potentially using an old, unfinished version of the soundtrack. The evidence? Well, it's that janky bell sound from Carnival Night Zone Act 2. That instrument voice does not exist in the voice banks used in 1103 or the final Mega Drive release, but it is found in the old voice bank. This suggests that the Sega sound team were updating the voice banks throughout Sonic 3's development, revising instrument sounds as they went, but that during the development of Origins, for whatever reason, the developers only had the outdated voice bank to work with when recreating the soundtrack. With this in mind, some of the things we've come across start to make more sense. That lower key in the Origins version of Carnival Night Act 1, that was the original key before it was changed to be 3 semitones higher for 1103, assumingly because the Sega sound team thought the track sounded better higher up. The lack of instrument variety across the Carnival Night Origins versions, that's the old bank, which had fewer voices available. These Origins versions are basically work in progress.
It's not done yet.
It's no wonder they sound odd. They weren't finished.
I wrote it in like 15 minutes.
And just to say again, this theory is not mine. It was put together by some very dedicated people over on Sonic Retro. So, given what we've covered here, why did Sega release Origins with what was potentially an out-of-date soundtrack? It might just be the case that this was the best Sega had in its archives. Game preservation is a big, contentious topic. A lot of light has been shed on the archiving practices, or lack thereof, of game companies in recent years. It's entirely possible that these old versions are all Jun Sinoue and his team had to go on when it came to replacing the tracks for Origins. It's almost been 2 years since Origins was released, and with no music update in Origins Plus, released last year, the possibility of an official music update from Sega appears less and less likely. Who knows, maybe Sinoue and Sega are happy with how these tracks turned out and see no reason to change them. However, this whole situation has highlighted the unwavering dedication of the Sonic modding community. Numerous music mods and fixes landed online within 24 hours of the game being released that gave everyone the option to enjoy the Sonic 3 soundtrack exactly how you wanted. Want to play the game with the original release soundtrack? You can. Want to play it with the 1103 tracks? You can. Want to play as SpongeBob SquarePants? You can. I don't know why.
F is for fire that burns down the whole town.
At the end of the day, the replacement music kicked up such a fuss because people love those tracks. The overall quality of Sonic games is a mixed bag, to say the least. But time and again, the soundtracks regularly get cited as one of the highlights. So really, the reaction to these new versions is people caring. Loudly. Anyway, hopefully now at least, having watched this, you might feel a little more like you understand what's going on in these tracks, and I hope you felt like you learned something. Thanks for watching. Okay, while researching for this video, I came across a series of videos by Bouncy Glow's Music Room, where he downgrades other Sonic tracks to make them sound closer to the Origins rearrangements. They make for very interesting and funny additional listening to what we've talked about in this video, so go check them out.